Well, it's closer to the latter than the former, and this will not be a particularly historic summit as the U.S. enters with very minimal preparation. Scott Bessent only started acting to prepare for the summit in the past few days. There were not the usual Sherpas in China, as in previous administrations, who were there weeks before to start initiating deals that the president would wrap up. And the real problem for Donald Trump here, as he goes to China, is that he has substantially weakened the United States in Iran leading up to this summit, as he's escorted by 12 U.S. so-called business leaders who are mostly tech oligarchs who are there to actually beg the chairman of the Communist Party of China for business deals. Donald Trump would probably like personally to find an off-ramp from this war that's devastating his own political position, even with his own base, and wrecking the U.S. economy, even as it stirs up record insider trading profits for himself and his cronies. Can China deliver on that? Will China deliver on that as it watches the U.S. position be so badly weakened? Well, the ball's in China's court. Donald Trump has brought the U.S. to Beijing in a weaker position than any U.S. administration of my lifetime. And it's because of what Robert Kagan, the author of the 90s era document calling for U.S. benevolent hegemony, the co-founder of the Project for a New American Century, just declared in the pages of the Atlantic magazine, a pro-Israel publication, to be the worst U.S. military defeat, the most damaging U.S. military defeat in history in Iran.
Wow.
The U.S. will not be able to demand anything of China, as it complains that China is helping to provide, for example, Beidou GPS targeting systems for Iran's missiles, as well as satellites that allow Iran to see sophisticated U.S. systems and radars at U.S. bases in the region. It will not be able to do that. So what we are going to see is a display of U.S. weakness, as well as the lifting of I think like the final lifting of the mask on the fraud that Donald Trump sold his base on America First, as he hands over new sections of the U.S. economy to Chinese investors.
Yes, I was going to raise that very point. There's speculation that China is going to start building factories in the United States, when it was an article of MAGA faith that China should not be allowed to own any land in the United States. And the rollback of agricultural land that China had already bought was one of the articles of faith. On one of the pavilions in the Forbidden City, there's the slogan of one of the emperors, forgive me, I forget which one, whose slogan was, "Do nothing." And when you think of it, that's actually what Xi Jinping has to do now. Do nothing. Let the Americans beg, let the Iranians knock hell out of America's military political position in the Persian Gulf, and just sit there smiling wryly, which he's quite good at, actually.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, there have been discussions of $1 trillion Chinese investment in the United States, which would presumably require China purchasing a lot of land in the U.S. Maybe on some level for the American consumer, it would be good to have, for example, access to BYD Chinese electric vehicles. We saw a lot of those when we were in Iran. They were certainly benefiting the Iranian consumer. They're cheaper and very durable and better than in many ways than Teslas produced by Elon Musk. But at the same time, what is Donald Trump doing to his own base here? Marjorie Taylor Greene has slammed him for this proposed $1 trillion deal as another betrayal of America First. And Laura Ingraham, who's more loyally in Donald Trump's camp, the Fox News host, still more loyal to Trump than Marjorie Taylor Greene, has called this one of the biggest mistakes of Donald Trump's presidency. Well, it's not really a mistake. This is actually baked into the cake. Donald Trump is purely transactional, and America First was basically a scam that he ran on an American public that had been sold out for over a decade through deals like NAFTA and CAFTA, got the opioid crisis to wipe out all the workers who were outsourced, and got the Iraq war to which fell disproportionately on poor districts in cities and on the Rust Belt, which elected Donald Trump. He scammed them all, and now they can see it.
You say it's not a mistake, but he is actually making a lot of mistakes these days, some of which are probably commonplace to you in the United States, but in the rest of the world, I think no one can really understand why he keeps talking about a ballroom, why every conversation gravitates towards a ballroom. I don't think any of us have ever heard a powerful political leader talk so much about something so ephemeral, something so essentially trivial. He's insulting women journalists in particular in the most vulgar way every single day. You can't really keep up with them, and not least because he's falling asleep in public, in front of the cameras, virtually every day. It's really hard for the rest of us to see this man still being president at the end of this term. Is it seen that way in the United States?
Increasingly, although the Republican base is still remaining cultishly loyal to Donald Trump, at least a wing of it, though its enthusiasm is weakened, and you can see in the special elections leading up to the midterms how much more motivated Democrats are. I think, I don't look at American politics that way as, enthusiasm from Democrats or lack of enthusiasm from Republican voters. It's the people who don't vote, who've been turned off to politics and disgusted, who are actually voting with their feet and voicing their disgust with the duopoly. And Donald Trump was supposed to represent this rogue figure who was rebelling against a duopoly and delivering a different kind of politics. Remember in his first primary debate in 2016, or it might have been 2015, when he said all these other candidates are funded by billionaires and corporations, but I'm a billionaire and I've funded them, so I'm an independent man. I was like, I thought that was incredible. That was something that the American public actually wanted to see. Now they can see he's controlled by Israel First billionaires. He's controlled by the AI warlords who are building data centers that we now learn 50,000 residents of Lake Tahoe will lose their power supply in order to supply a data center. Donald Trump is a representative of the forces that are destroying American life for the majority and wiping out possibly $1 trillion in economic output through the disastrous Iran war he's initiated. Meanwhile, he has built a golden calf, a golden idol of himself pumping his fist at his Doral golf course at a ceremony organized by evangelical and ultra-Orthodox religious figures who are basically his religious marionettes. They built an actual golden calf in the center of the National Mall. Donald Trump has repaved the base of the reflecting pool to make it look like a pool at Epstein's Zorro Ranch or a pool at Mar-a-Lago. This is costing $40 million, $50 million. And when Donald Trump and Doug Burgum, his commerce secretary, drove over the pool in what was supposed to be a triumphant moment, they actually damaged the pavement, requiring more cost overruns. And now you also talk about the White House ballroom. If you look over the east end of the White House, you can see the ruins of trees that were mowed down dating back to the Calvin Coolidge administration. Basically old growth trees, rose gardens. It's a great metaphor for what the Trump administration has done to whatever was left of the American Republic. And that, too, is another cost overrun. Donald Trump said, oh, the ballroom's just going to cost it's not going to cost American taxpayers anything because, my corporate buddies who pay for my campaigns will take care of it. It turns out the taxpayer is now on the hook for over $1 billion as it keeps expanding after this very strange incident at the White House press correspondence dinner where there was a shooter who shot no one and didn't even get shot. They said they need, anti-drone technology. They need to establish a security base under the ballroom. It needs to be built. And where's all the money going to go to? It's all going to go to contractors that have been paying Donald Trump. So more corruption, just like the corruption that has granted Pentagon contracts for 2 separate drone companies that are now owned by Donald Trump's sons, one of which is actually an Israeli company that's producing technology for the Iran war. So we're talking about corruption that makes Hunter Biden look like Ralph Nader. It's corruption that makes Hunter Biden's art look like a Girl Scout baked cookie sale. It's the most corrupt administration we've ever seen, and most Americans are seeing it, but the reaction for many is to just react with disgust and turn away from politics, which is why the generic ballot for congressional midterms doesn't even show the Democrats up by that much.
And don't forget the phone, the Donald Trump gold phone, which raised and which has disappeared $59 million. Hundreds of thousands of people paid a deposit for a phone which has never been produced and is not now going to be produced. If you and I did that, we'd be in jail. He's in the White House.
Yeah, I remember seeing Eric Trump on Steve Bannon's show advertising that phone. You're going to get it's a secure line. You're going to be able to speak unencrypted to anyone on a golden Donald Trump phone. And, in some ways you deserve what you get if you fell for that scam. But there's not going to be any punishment there. And the Department of Justice is also investigating $2.8 billion of insider trades made since February 28th when Trump launched his illegal war of aggression on Iran on behalf of Israel. Do you think the DOJ is actually going to turn up convictions and indict the Trump administration? Right now, the DOJ is Donald Trump's personal law firm.
Yeah, I wanted to move on to Iran. The vast majority of the people in our poll, 25,000 people have voted already. They think that the Iran war is back on again, and that as soon as he gets back from China, presumably, the war is on. I've got my doubts about that. I think that the Iranians have won that war, and I think the American military brass know it, and people in the White House with more sense than Donald Trump know it. What's your take on it?
Yes, I agree with that assessment. Donald Trump knows it. Donald Trump doesn't want to be in the war, but he's unable to walk away from it. He doesn't want to be called Taco Trump. He wants to save face. He has no moral victory to show for himself to be able to walk away, so it's humiliating, and he can't accept the humiliation, but he can't go back in because he will be politically pulverized. The Republican leadership doesn't like the war. The vice president doesn't like the war. I don't think Marco Rubio's that enthusiastic about the war, which is why he stayed away from negotiations and stayed ringside with Trump at UFC fights. The Chinese government does not like the war and will be encouraging Donald Trump to end it and using enormous amounts of economic leverage to try to end this war and open up the Strait of Hormuz. However, who does like the war? It's the foreign apartheid state that has Donald Trump by the short and curlies. We're talking about Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu just delivered an interview to 60 Minutes in which he was allowed to actually choose his interviewer by self-described Zionist fanatic and CBS editor-in-chief Barry Weiss, who was installed by the Ellison family, who are close friends with Benjamin Netanyahu and bought CBS. through Paramount for that specific purpose of making it a propaganda megaphone for Netanyahu. Netanyahu chose former Fox News host Major Garrett as his interviewer, got a softball interview, and in the course of that interview, he called for the United States to actually put boots on the ground in Iran. After all the bloodshed and disaster we witnessed and the economic chaos, Netanyahu wants the U.S. to bring special forces into Iran to steal Iran's so-called nuclear dust, its enriched uranium stockpile, which would be a disastrous operation that would lead to absolutely dead Americans, possibly American hostages. Netanyahu will not allow this war to end. His military even put forward a proposal to Donald Trump to destroy all of Iran's essential infrastructure and energy within 24 hours. Israel claimed it could be able to do that. Can you imagine what would happen if Donald Trump listened to Israel and allowed them to do that? I mean, what would happen?
Well,
it would be the end. I think it would be the end of the UAE.
It would be the end for November, right? I mean, presumably, he cares the outcome in November because his own liberty, never mind office, might count on it. I mean, if he wants a Democrat majority in both houses and the ability to impeach and remove him from office, well, he'll go ahead and listen to Netanyahu and do that.
Yeah, that would be one consequence. The Democrats, the Republicans are gerrymandering the hell out of the country right now. And the Supreme Court basically just obliterated the Voting Rights Act so they can take away black representation below the Mason-Dixon line in the South. But they're still, even after all of this finagling, they're still looking at losing 10 to 15, maybe even 20 seats. If Donald Trump goes back into Iran because his boss, Netanyahu, orders him to in another strategy room meeting, the damage will be worse. But we also have to consider the damage regionally. Israel is struggling mightily against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and it has elections coming up. If elections were held today in Israel, Likud would lose and Benjamin Netanyahu would no longer be prime minister. And what's happening in Lebanon is a factor. So too were Iranian ballistic missiles just hammering Israeli cities, with Israel running out of its interceptor stockpiles. Israel would also, by going back into Iran, trigger, I think, the possible toppling of governments in Bahrain. I don't know what would happen in Kuwait. They would get hammered because they've been hosting U.S. attacks on Iran, but also the UAE. There's a very interesting op-ed that appeared this week in the Saudi paper, Al-Sharq Al-Awsat, published by Prince Turki Al Faisal, who's the former intelligence minister. And he was trying to explain the real role that Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, has played throughout this war. We've been told that MBS was actually lobbying for the war, that he was a major force, but according to Prince Turki, MBS was a stabilizing force who tried to keep the Gulf states from entering the fight and tried to protect their own population from the U.S.-Israeli aggression, and that he succeeded, suggesting that the UAE was taking another position. And one thing that was tucked into that article was the concession by Prince Turki that if Saudi Arabia had gotten more involved, Iran would have destroyed their desalination plants and their oil infrastructure and destroyed the entire country. So he's basically saying Iran had the power to destroy those countries. Now, the UAE, which is Israel's partner in the Epstein Accords, or I should say the Abraham Accords, has been barking threats against Iran and claiming that they can hammer Iran. No, the UAE would face the same consequence as Saudi Arabia if the war begins again. The destruction of their desalination plants and their energy infrastructure at a time when temperatures are, I don't know Celsius, I apologize to your audience, but peaking above 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the region, which means everybody depends on air conditioning or they have to completely leave the region. And I know people who've left the UAE, and it's like they signed some kind of NDA agreement or something. Like, no one is allowed to talk to me who is in the UAE or who left because they might want to come back because they're so afraid of that repressive dictatorial government. But let me just say the situation there right now, based on what I've heard, is worse than we even understand.
Netanyahu very helpfully, or his office very helpfully this afternoon, let it be known that Netanyahu had made a secret visit to the UAE in the middle of the Iran war. And that'll do wonders for MBZ's standing in the region, particularly in Saudi Arabia. I have said all along, and I say again, and I entirely agree with what you've just said, that Saudi Arabia is the one Gulf country that tried to avoid all this and is the least penetrated by the Netanyahu gang. But the UAE is the vanguard. It's right out there, out front. They actually mounted attacks against Iran. Never mind hosting American attacks. They mounted their own, and they are now in possession of anti-aircraft machinery and weaponry that has been given to them by Israel. So we are seeing the tectonic plates, even inside the Gulf, shifting, aren't we?
Well, the shift will be towards, this will be one of the outcomes of the U.S. failure in this war, is the shift will have to be towards the Gulf countries diversifying their international relations and starting to balance their relationship with the U.S. with better relations with China, better military cooperation with Russia, and better relations with Iran. And this is thanks to the prowess, asymmetrical prowess that Iran has demonstrated here. Saudi Arabia is already suggesting that it's poised to do that, whereas the UAE has made what might be a fatal mistake, which is that it is leaned entirely on its Epstein Accords or Abraham Accords alliance. It's put all of its cookies in the Trump family cookie jar. It is responsible for a majority of donations to Jared Kushner's investment firm. They have this ambassador in Washington, Youssef Otaiba. I've run into him on 2 occasions. And his job is to be like the biggest American bro, hang out with Fox News hosts. He invites them all over to his house to watch movies. I've seen him show up in like gym shorts at lawn parties in Georgetown. And he is the point man for the UAE. They don't have another strategy, along with basically buying every American influencer they can. They're totally invested in normalization with Israel. It's a similar mistake the Saudis actually made back in the second Bush term when their ambassador at the time, Prince Bandar, was totally invested in the U.S. and the neocons. And look at the situation they've gotten themselves in, where they're on the verge, as Prince Turki acknowledged in his op-ed, of destruction if there's another round of warfare with Iran. That's not a position any country can afford in this coming multipolar world.
Lastly, Max, the master, I keep you too long, I fear, but if there's one saving grace in the entire Trump administration foreign policy, it seems to me that they would like to end this war in Ukraine. And I said in my monologue that when I left Moscow, I could sense that with the spring had come a new confidence that this war, which has cost the lives of well over 1 million people, has cost hundreds of billions, if not $1 trillion or more in treasure, and has created such tensions in the world that people go to bed at night in some places, some households, worrying about World War III, that the Trump administration would like to bring it to an end. Am I being over-optimistic on that?
I mean, what is the Trump administration? Because if we include the CIA or the so-called deep state, they don't appear very interested in ending this war. And Donald Trump and his negotiators have just been so lazy diplomatically that they haven't taken any serious measures to de-escalate. The U.S. intelligence is escalating. They're behind these bombings of Russian pipelines, which have also increased the price of oil and also driven inflation and also contributed to the inability of the Fed in the U.S., for example, to cut rates, interest rates. This is another factor, along with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the pain of the global economy. You think the Ukrainians are able to do those strikes on their own inside Russian territory? No. And what are they achieving militarily? They're not actually altering Russia's calculus or stopping the advance of Russian forces. It's simply something that can be pointed to, and you see New York Times articles hyping it up to continue this war. I would also point everyone who's watching this now to a remarkable interview by Tucker Carlson of Vladimir Zelensky's former press secretary, Yulia Mendel. In that interview, she completely exposes Vladimir Zelensky as a fraud and a charlatan who has been propped up as a puppet of the British and U.S. war state. And she notes that he actually had vacationed in Crimea after it was annexed by Russia, which had been a secret until now, just to illustrate what a fraud he is. But she also goes back to the time of the supposed Bucha massacre, which, and she doesn't go deep into Bucha, but she raises some interesting questions about it and then confirms that at that time, most Ukrainians were expecting a peace deal, some kind of negotiation around Istanbul in April 2022, and that the war would come to an end so that tens and tens of thousands of Ukrainian men wouldn't be sent to the meat grinder. And instead, Boris Johnson, who is close to Zelensky, British Prime Minister, flies in, promises Zelensky everything, including to be a global hero, backed by Hollywood. And Zelensky basically agrees to shatter the Istanbul negotiations and continue the war for as long as possible. And that now Zelensky, who is entirely a creation of the U.S., backed by British intelligence, is continuing the war against the wishes of his own people. Let's look at the polls of Ukrainians. This war is unpopular inside Ukraine. They want an agreement with Russia to stop the killing. And every day, new footage comes out. Shocking footage. I can't even watch it. It's too painful to watch, of Ukrainian men being hauled into white vans while their families and children try to save them from being sent to the front. So this war is not popular among anyone. The U.S. public is not interested in it. The only people who want it are the war industry and the Trump family, as I mentioned before. They're contracting with drone companies who are going to make profits from this war. So I think this administration has totally betrayed its promise to end this war. And that's why we're seeing even Zelensky's former staffers, his former top propagandist, come out and call for peace on the program of what was once Donald Trump's top media ally.
Max Blumenthal has highlighted a reality that more and more people are beginning to see. Trump's promises to make America great again have been overshadowed by costly wars, political deception, and major strategic failures. From his desperate outreach to China to disastrous military adventures in the Middle East, these events reveal chaos and inconsistency in Washington's foreign policy. What deserves criticism is that the Trump administration constantly tried to project strength, yet the outcome has been economic strain, declining global credibility, and military failures that many consider among the worst in modern American history. Tough rhetoric cannot hide the fact that reckless decisions have made the world more unstable while ordinary Americans continue paying the price. In my view, this is no longer just the failure of one individual, but a reflection of a deeper crisis within America's political leadership and its obsession with global dominance. What do you think about this perspective? Is the United States weakening because of its own strategic mistakes? Or is this simply part of a larger global political struggle? Share your opinion below.